Hi everyone, welcome to this section. In this section, we are going to do a SQL Server failover cluster installation. Uh, there are a couple of prerequisites which we need to follow and a couple of things which we need to have handy when we are going to run the SQL Server setup on a cluster-aware hardware. Uh, the first thing which we need is .NET Framework 4.6 for SQL Server 2017. If you have not installed the framework, not to worry about. It comes packaged with SQL Server 2017 setup, and it will install while you run the setup. We require external storage. It can be NTFS or REFS file format for the demonstration purpose for this demo. I have an NTFS file system with iSCSI and formatted it with 64 kilobyte AUS, that is allocation unit size. Um, Before we run the setup, we need to make sure that we have the environment configured with cluster. We need a failover cluster network name. We need a failover cluster IP address. We need an Active Directory account for SQL Server Service and SQL Server Agent Service. For this demo purpose, I'm limited to have just these two services installed. For other services, we can revisit later on. For administrative accounts, we need Windows account to provision a SQL Server system administrator. The best to use is a security group. You can have as many users added to the security group, and just we need to add the security group to the SQL Server login. So let's see how to run the setup. So I'm logged into one of my machine. So it's a 2-node cluster. So let's have a look on our failover cluster manager. So we navigate to our cluster. So I have created this cluster by SQL cluster p.dbprox.local. So let's have a look at the configuration here for my cluster. So we have a quorum configured while setting it up. So we have a quorum disk, and we have our cluster name associated with an IP address. So if you are doing on a multi-subnet, it will look a little different, but because we have just 2-node cluster with one Active Directory, so right now I'm just having one IP address. Just navigate to the nodes. So we have 2-node cluster, both are up. These nodes were added into the cluster. If you have more than one node, you can just right click on the node and then click add, provide the fully qualified domain name or just the name of the server to add that. In the storage, we have two storage added, one for the quorum and one for the SQL data, which is under the available storage. We will use this while doing the installation. In the network tab, we have two network cards each on each of the nodes. One is for the heartbeat and one is for the client connects and the cluster. Now let's just quickly see on the storage where the storage is before we go on to our setup. So right now our storage disk pool is on server 1. I'm logged on to server 2 right now, which is SGP2. So let's move the storage to the node 2. So just right click, go to move option, and sorry, it is just move available storage here on the right side. Select the node, click the node name and select OK. It will just do a failover from node 1 to node 2. So this is moved. Now we have to move our quorum also, or we can just move the whole cluster to node 2. It's not necessary to move everything there. We just move the available storage. That's fine. Let's see the disk right now. So the quorum has moved. The available storage is on node 2. Now let's quickly go to the setup and run the setup file. So the setup file is on C drive, so let's go there. SQL Server 2017 and run the setup. Now we are in the SQL Installation Center. Go to install and then go a little down. You will see new SQL Server Failover cluster installation. Click that. So I have the developer edition installed, so you will see specify a free edition. So either you can use evaluation or the developer edition. So though I have downloaded the developer edition, so I can put, but if you have a product key, you can choose to have that product key installed. So if you have an enterprise edition license key, you can put it. So this developer edition will convert to the enterprise edition. But once installed, you cannot change the edition. You can upgrade it, but you cannot change the edition. So just click next. Now accept the licensing term and click next. It will run some couple of rules checks to see whether a computer needs a restart or not. You have the right frameworks. Now in this section it is Microsoft updates. If there are any updates after this, it will try to download, but I'm in a secluded environment, so I don't have access to internet, so I just uncheck that or do not select it and click next. Click next. So it will just do install setup files. Now the failover cluster rules were done and passed. So just have a quick look about the warnings. So the warnings can be ignored, but if there are any failures, those failures need to be fixed before we proceed further. So in this case, we have our Microsoft Cluster Services cluster verification warning. Let's have a quickly look what it says. The cluster service has been validated, but there are warnings in the MSCS cluster validation report. So that's okay, that's fine. We can just go ahead, click next. Now it will move to the feature selection. Now you need to select what features you're going to install. So I'm going to choose just database engine services. In the earlier releases, the database engine service comes only with SQL Server replication and full text, but now they have added the data quality services as well. So if you want to read about more, you can Google them up and you can read. But for this demo, I'm just using the database engine services with 3 features. So I'm gonna use the client tool connectivity, backward compatibility, client tool SDKs, client tool SDK. That's it. And this is going to be installed on SQL and Program 5 Microsoft SQL Server. If you wish to change it, you can change it if you have another drive, but on these servers, I have a local disk C. Now click next. Now provide a SQL Server host name, or sorry, the network name. So this network name for new SQL Server failover cluster. This will be the name used to identify your failover cluster on the network. So I'm gonna give it to SQL SGTP1 and just a default instance ID. If you want to use a named instance, you can click the name instance and you can change the instance name as well, but this is my first installation. I'm just using the default one. Click next. On the cluster resource group, so the cluster resource group name will be same, which we have put in, but if you want to change, you have to go to the previous section where we are doing the instance configuration. In the storage underline, if you see that we have available storage which is already reserved by Windows failover, so the storage which we are going to use for our data is already added, so that is what the message says. And the cluster group is reserved by the Windows failover cluster. So nothing to change here, just click next. Now this is the instance which we are going to do the installation for. If you see the message here, the program is already configured and this particular disk is already in use, so this disk cannot be used. The available disk is SQL 01, so we will choose that for our instance. Click next. Now here in this section we have to provide the cluster network configuration. We have to provide the IP address for our instance. So you need to allocate the addresses before you even try to install the SQL Server on a cluster aware hardware. So I'm just giving up the IP address which I have reserved. Click next. Now here you have to provide the account name under which our services will run. So let me quickly browse that. So I'm going to use an administrative account, or I can use one of the account which I've created just now. SQL Server account. Click OK. I provide the password. Most of the organization use different accounts for database engine and SQL Server agent services, but for the demo purpose I'm using the same account. I'm just searching. Click OK. Provide the password. So here we have this grant perform volume maintenance task privileges to SQL Server database engine service. So in the earlier version we need to by default go and make some changes for instant file initialization, but here we have this option to just click here and that will be done. So but I just want to tell a little bit about what this performance volume maintenance task is. So we have to grant this for SQL Server service account upon the database creation. So SQL Server need to zero out the MDF and LDF files. If we don't provide that, then it will hit a little bit performance, because when we create the database file, the SQL Server will take a lot of time to zero out the files, but instant file initialization will make it quick. So let's click that and click next. So I have to change the account. I got an error that this particular account does not exist. So I got this checked into the Active Directory. It's basically a security group. So I got a new account. So I'm going to use it. Bear with me. So I got the SQL Service account now. Let's quickly change the password. And the same for here. I can just copy it from here. I just put it. So now let's click next. So I haven't changed anything on the collection. I got an error where it says the specified credential for SQL Server service are not valid. So let's do a quick troubleshooting here. That why is not valid. SQL service account. Okay, so there is a problem. Click next. Let's see if it goes. Yeah, so now we move to SQL Server configuration. Here I will add the logged in user here, but under which I'm logged in right now. So just leave it that. Now, as you have seen that I have under this disk selection, I have opted for S drive to install all my data dictionaries or database data files. So all whatever the database will get created, they will go into this location. If you have multiple drives, then you can choose all those multiple drives, and then here you will have option where you wanted to put the log file, where you want to put the data file, where you want to have a backup directory configuration, and then we will have a tempdb. So here we have to define the location for our tempdb files, but as I have only one drive, I'm going to install everything on one drive. So all my databases which get created will be on S drive. So here you can provide as number of files you want. You can do a tempdb configuration here. So I'm just going on with the default one. I'm not using file stream, so I'm not going to make any changes to it. So now click next. Now ready to the installation. The configuration be done. Whatever the configuration you have done in the sum of here, and if you want to go on and see around this configuration file which is created, you find it in Bootstrap. So just quickly go ahead and click install. So it is going to take some time for the setup to complete. We will go on to the other node, and we will do a add node setup so that all the engine services will be installed on the other node as well, so that we can easily fail over between instance 1 from server 1 to server 2.